director and curator here at Dunlop Art Gallery. I'm also the curator of the exhibition Black Prairies, which is just open today. I'd like to begin with doing a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge I'm currently situated on Treaty 4 territory, which is the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis. The Canada Public Library is committed to working together with Indigenous peoples as we take important steps forward on the pathway of collaboration, reconciliation, and change. So as I mentioned, my name is Alyssa Farron, and I'm the director and curator at the gallery. So we're here to celebrate the opening of the exhibition, and we'll have a panel discussion which will last about 45 minutes or so with these people that we have here, these lovely artists, as well as our moderator, Dana Inkster. And then we'll leave some time at the end, around 15 minutes or so, for questions. So we have, whether you're joining us here in person, online on the live stream, or if you're watching the recording later on, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I have many thank yous to give before we get started. So I want to say thank you to my staff. I have an incredible team here at the gallery, both past and present Dunlop staff members are just such amazing people to work with. So that would be Wendy Peart, as well as Thomas Johnson, John Cody, Jesse Dishaw, Zach Elliott, whose last day is today, Zach. Eric Hill, Sarah Pittman, Aisha Mosin, Margaret Basai, Eugene Sang, John David, and Shameen Agamina. I want to give a clap to the team, because honestly, a really, really strong team. I also want to say thank you to the sponsors of the gallery as well as this exhibition, and that would be Canadian Heritage, Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, Sask Culture, Sask Lotteries, and Sask Sports. So we really appreciate their financial support for allowing us to make this work happen. So I want to read the bios of the people who, so yeah, it will take me a few minutes to get through that. I also want to mention that one of the panelists, Anna Binta Diallo, she wasn't able to make it today. Her flight from Winnipeg got canceled last night. Unfortunately, the weather has been really not cooperating with us. But she wishes that she could be here. So Anna Binta Diallo is a multidisciplinary visual artist who explores themes of memory and nostalgia to create unexpected works about identity. She was born in Dakar. She was born in Dakar in Senegal and grew up in Manitoba and lived for more than 15 years in Montreal. She completed her BFA at University of Manitoba's School of Fine Arts and received her MFA from the Transart Institute in Berlin. Her work has been widely exhibited in Canada and internationally. Next, I'll read Judah Iyunade. So Judah Iyunade is a Nigerian-born lens-based artist based in Winnipeg, Canada. His work draws deeply from his Nigerian heritage, using photography, film, and performance to explore themes of history and identity, with a focus on the African diasporic experience. Blending elements of West African studio photography, his portraits often reveal moments of vulnerability and intimacy. In 2020, he was recognized as a Platform Photography Award winner. Welcome. Next is Richard Allan Thomas. So Richard Allan Thomas is a researcher living and working in Toronto, Canada, whose practice involves multi-stage hybrid processes, exploring loss, memory, chronopolitical futurity, and transtemporal cartography. Welcome, Richard. And then Chukwudubem, who is here on my right. Chukwudubem is an artist, curator, and writer whose interdisciplinary practice is an inquiry into semiotic dissonance, tapping into a diverse spectrum of influences from experimental music and literature to history and futurisms. Ukaigwe, Ukaigwe, Ukaigwe approaches his art practice as a double gesture. On one hand, his work is a way of annotating, augmenting, defacing, transposing, and writing in the margins of a palimpsestic history. On the other hand, his paintings, installations, and video works are an attempt to assemble and compose a speculative sensorium that permits hearing in a different tempo. By bringing to center facets of everyday life, Ukaigwe enacts a compositional practice that is fabulated out of the choice to meander in extant modes of being, fugitive, improvised, ongoing, and otherwise. Welcome. And then our moderator, Dana Inkster. Dana Inkster is an artist of African descent who has worked in the education and cultural sectors since 1995. She recognizes storytelling as the primary tool that shapes their communities. Dana has been profiled by numerous publications and journalists and cultural theorists from around the world who have lauded her documentary film work. Her documentary, 24 Days in Brooks, from 2007, was co-produced by the National Film Board of Canada and CBC. She continues to make independent documentaries that explore personal and cultural histories. She has served as faculty and played key roles in fund development for a number of institutions. And for years, Dana's company has been publishing Lethbridge Living magazine. Most recently, Dana has agreed to write the memoir of her 81-year-old father, who was former commissioner of the RCMP and president of Interpol, Norman Minister. Okay, so I think I wonder if we should begin with the slides or maybe begin with some questions well, let's start with the slides. We have some slides and I think I just wanted everyone to just briefly talk about their work in the exhibition. So we'll start with Richard.
Okay, I'm Richard. This is the sculpture that you'll see in the gallery. Is up on the right now. I was developing a series of. How long do you have? Really good. Okay. I was doing a solo exhibition. In doing so, research, I was reading a lot of this really strong women indigenous African side, and I was doing a lot of work ancestral and representing ancestral technologies. It's hard to map your place in map the universe in like a one conception of time without understanding your place in the universe first. So to do so, I thought I would do something a lot more introspective and personal, and while doing so, a lot of things came up emotionally. Stuff I hadn't thought about in a long time. Like I was in Toronto, life in the prairies was a lot different. Growing up in the prairies is like basically a lot more easy. And remembering one big thing that stood out about this piece for me was when she passed the opening of the book in Edmonton. I felt like it was a horrifying experience seeing anybody seeing that in the past. But in this sense, I felt like from commercial and I don't know if my name was like at the top of the priority list. It didn't seem like the room into the issue very well. really great in those memories through the process one of discovery and building something special that would make the precious and powerful and try to rewrite a lot of those wonderful memories I had from the experience. In doing so, I was able to use a longer story but while developing this and reading documentaries, reading up on books, looking at old archival photographs, I was able to discover the rest of history in Alberta, namely finding out about the valley and the history of it, and talking to discovery with around the history of it. Yeah, this whole experience of doing this memoir and my mother was a massive discovery because this really was like a everything that we learned in school. It's a really special place to me. It's really close to everything else to me.
My name is Iyunade. The work currently in the gallery for my work it's from a photographic series I started, a self-portrait series called Alara. And Alara it also happens to be my father's family. I didn't know before I started to work, but I kind of found out from the work because I was interested in my family's history of migration, specifically my mom's family. My mom's is from a tribe in Costa Rica, West Africa. And it's sort of the way like displaced and we moved to the Americans. And my mom's family sort of started a new settlement in a completely different place, and we still kept the tradition alive. And one of the key elements of keeping the tradition alive is keeping this masquerade culture, which my great grandfather was a masquerade, was the first masquerade of the settlement, and my mom's uncle sort of continue the tradition of being a masquerade. And the masquerade is it's a form of masquerade that sort of only honors matrilineal ancestors, and because the origin story of this minority tribe is like they believe everyone from the tribe sort of descends from the same mother, and the masquerade is done. The ceremony is done to honor that mother, and also everyone's mother too is sort of connected to the to the first mother. And I was interested in the practice because it's something my mom briefly sort of talked about, and as I grew older I was more drawn towards it because I was also studying this I was also studying this photographic practice from the 60s, which is the West African studio um, photography movement, which was the first time we had Africans sort of making images of what a post-colonial African society looks like without the influence of without colonial influence, and in a way that it's sort of like making history by making those images. And I was so drawn to that sort of practice that was sort of like filled with like the field to explore, to use obscure backdrops, to use scenic backdrops as a way, to sort of like aspire for different things and to also like craft a narrative about this like emerging new society. And um, I think one of the like earliest introduction to that style of photography was actually from Chukwudubem. He, he gave me a book like I think 8 years ago. I met him when he was in his BFA program. I kind of met him in one of the studios, and we became friends from there. We've been friends for almost a decade now. So he introduced me to this these photographers, and I kind of just continued from there. And it made me want to sort of like make work like that. And but I was also had to start to think more about like smaller histories because I was really interested in history too. We used to read together. Yeah, like we had a book club. We used to read books and stuff together, and we'd share a lot of films and a lot of works and things together, which I think we still do, but not as much. But yeah, that's a this introduction to my work and also to Chukwudubem.
Thank you. We could get the next slide. Oh, okay, Anna Binta. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Anna Binta, she couldn't make it today. Her flight unfortunately was canceled, but I'll speak briefly about her work. So this series is it's a set of collages on a material called phototext. So it's not quite vinyl. There's like a bit of like a texture to it that makes it reusable. And so the collages, the images in the collages are from or are inspired by stories that her dad used to tell her when she was younger. So her dad, I guess his claim to fame was sort of that he was the first Senegalese man in Winnipeg. I don't know if we can confirm or deny those claims, but that was sort of what he used to say. He came to Winnipeg in the 1980s for university, where he eventually met Anna's mom, who's a Franco-Manitoban woman, and decided to stay. But he, prior to coming to Canada, he would read these graphic novels that really romanticized and kind of used a lot of stereotyped images of the West, like the Canadian West, or the frontier. And so she incorporated some of those images into her work, as well as images that are used to stereotype parts of Africa or Africa as the continent. So she kind of pulls together or combines these different stereotyped images of these different regions informing her identity, and then creates like a set of images that you'll see in the exhibition. Yeah, so that's Anna Binta's work. If we could get the next slide. Eugene, do you mind just, thank you. Next slide.
Is it going the right way?
Yeah, Chukwudubem.
Hello. Thank you, Alisa, for all the work you've done and bringing this together. I just want to return that gesture quickly and say, like, the humor and my friendship with humor has really affected my practice in multiple ways, especially my paintings. As a colleague to my work, all the painting work has kind of been heavily inspired by some of the films Iyunade has shared within his library. And this morning, I made a joke about being a human form of ChatGPT because it just looks like it. Because everything I ask me when we can know everything I know the dates, especially when it pertains to African history and the history of movement within the continent. I just want to quickly talk about the work, and when Alisa kind of reached out to me to be part of the show, and like it just occurred to me that I had to make new work for the show, and we were sharing a lot of research documents for movements to prairies. And I was kind of doing a lot of study on this. And also thinking about myself because I'm a Nigerian and I came here about a decade ago, to Winnipeg. I was thinking about thinking through immigration as a student at BTC, and there was an unsettlement that came from talking about our story. There's a lot of stuff that was happening that was still very, very active and unsettled. And I was like, maybe I'm gonna have to wait to kind of approach the subject matter of a lot of new about immigration. But one thing I was at that moment looking at and kind of researching was the Windrush era, and particularly how one part of the Windrush era has kind of been explored, which is kind of a movement from England, black people to Canada, because it's kind of always about from the West Indies, Jamaica and Caribbean to England, but there's a lot of people also came from England, Canada, and how I kind of got to know this is my friend Sapphire McCloy has a very, very big family in Winnipeg, and before this show came up, in some was kind of I just had an interest in doing my kind of research, and I was kind of I kind of learned the cultural aspect and whatnot. And so I kind of started thinking about our first ancestor who came here was an uncle came from England with his wife. And I kind of started this mass of movement directly from Jamaica and directly from England. And I started thinking about the Windrush era from a more layered point of view, and I started doing some research. And I was like telling that someone was okay, yeah, to the Windrush, and this is perfect for this situation. Yeah, and maybe I'm going to talk about later on the Windrush and everything, but just to bit about the painting, yeah, it's kind of it has image transfers, and I would say within the work, I was thinking about form and this idea of repetition and this idea about a lot of these forms are kind of inspired indirectly from African architecture and African fabric, and just forms in general. And I was thinking about ways of kind of repeating forms in different ways as a way of kind of thinking about how even within mass movements, we still have unique ways of movement or unique histories and unique stories, and kind of trying to kind of use that as a way of thinking about cartography and mapping. But also, I'm also getting these images from the archives and these archives like newspapers, tablets that I'm reading, just government documents, etc. And kind of bringing them away from the text. And something I think a lot about bringing this image from the text, but I'm also bringing them within a painting and juxtaposing them with other images, very carefully, and thinking about these histories and trying to make a kind of yeah, stuff. And also this idea of trapping too, I was kind of and re-narration, which at that moment we're talking about the city had minus population and trying to really kind of think about histories and trying to fill up histories and trying to imagine gaps within these histories. I'll say that for now. And I can
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to speak briefly about some of the exhibition as well. So I just selected a few images from each of the archives. So this is a photograph called plate number 37. Really know this. It's one of my favorites from the Beal glass plate archive. I'll just tell you a little bit about who Billy Beal was, and then I'll maybe share more about this particular image. So Beal was He was born in 1874 in Chelsea, Massachusetts. He eventually trained as a sawmill engineer in the United States, moved around, and he heard about work opportunities in Canada, specifically in Manitoba. At the time, in the early 1900s in Manitoba, the lumber industry was growing, and part of that was to fill increased demand for railway ties, as the Canadian government was wanting to continue its expansionist mission of the Canadian National Railway. And so a lot of those lumber companies required huge workforces, and Beal, being trained as a sawmill engineer, heard about work opportunities, heard about land opportunities, and decided that he would head north and go to Canada. So he moved in, I think it was 1905, to Swan River Valley region, which is a small town in southwestern Manitoba. And while he was there, he had his day job as a sawmill engineer working in the lumber yards, but he was also an avid cultural producer. So outside of his 9 to 5, he had such a passion for photography. And so between the period of around 1915 to 1925, he took almost 100 photographs of everyday life, homesteading life in that particular region. So as I said, he was a lone Black migrant, and the community that he was in was primarily white settlers of Scandinavian and Nordic descent. And so he really took on that role as a documenter. So this is one of the photographs from that time period. And I like it because I think when I've read about the type of immigrants that Canada wanted at the time, it was primarily women who were, who had a lot of children. But I like this photo because she seems really independent and child-free, and I just think it's a beautiful image. The next photo, that's the self-portrait of Billy Beal. So I don't know if it's the only self-portrait, but it's the only one that we have in the archive. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's the only one he took or if that's just the only one we have. And so people have asked a lot about the halo that's sort of like around his face, and that just would have been like a chemical substance that he applied to filter or smooth out perceived imperfections on his face, just like how, on TikTok or Instagram, people use a filter. That would have been, I guess, like an early 1900s version of a face filter. And then the second set of archives that you'll see in the exhibition is the Frank B. Jamerson phone. So it's named the Frank B. Jamerson phone because it's named after the collector of the photographs, not the actual photographer. So Frank B. Jamerson, so first I'll tell you how I learned about this set of archives. I was reading the thesis of a former UBC student named Daliso Mwanza, and in it he explores the topic of Black leisure on the prairies. And so as part of his thesis, he pulled a few images representing, not this specific image, but other images representing Black leisure on the prairies throughout time. And so that kind of sent me into this rabbit hole of wanting to find out more and learn more about this body of work. And so I selected a set of images from that archive. This is one of my favorites as well. This is Rosa and Mary, taken around 1940 around Amber Valley, Alberta. And so the photographs in this archive, it's primarily photographs of Black people who were photographed by other Black people probably from within their community, people that they knew and were friends with. And so I just think that these photos are really, really beautiful. And I selected, so even though the archive spans from around 1910 to the 1960s or so, I really wanted to focus on the subset of work from around 1910 to 1940. And for me, that represents roughly the first generation or so, or the first 30 years after the Great Black Migration of 1910. For those of you who were here last night who watched the film, you learned all about the Great Black Migration of 1910. But essentially, the Great Black Migration was several families, around 1,000 to 1,500 African American families who left who were living in Midwestern and Southern United States, Oklahoma, Kansas, parts of Texas, etc., and who had to leave. So around 1910, particularly when Oklahoma entered statehood, that brought with it laws such as the Jim Crow laws, which also meant an increase in violence and lynchings. And the situation became extremely difficult for Black people to continue living there. And so these families realized that they had to leave and seek refuge elsewhere. So they migrated and headed north to the prairies, and established these pockets of all Black communities in different parts of the prairies. Last night's film documented the Saskatchewan cohort, the Shiloh people, and the photos in this archive document the Alberta cohort, known as the Amber Valley people. So you'll see some of those photographs. And also in the exhibition, I included the verso so just the back of the photographs. So I thought, as I was going through the archive, I was it really struck me how some of the messages were really lovely and intimate, where people would take photographs and they would send it to their loved one or their friend, and they would kind of write a little message to them on the back. So I really wanted to share that with people. So we got some high resolution scans done of the back, and we included that as well. So that image just says, from niece to Auntie Viola. It's Rosa and Mary. This is another favorite. This is Nellie Wagner. And then the text that's written on it. It's a bit hard to see, but anyway, she's 21 years old, and it was taken on October 19th, 1926 in Edmonton, Alberta. And this is Auntie Viola. So, Miss Viola Brown, taken around 1940. And then the verse. So just a message that Viola wrote to her friend. She says that she took the photo on her way to work, on her way to church that morning. Yeah. Okay. So, Dana, I think you might have some questions for us to
Well, I do have questions, and I want to say how delighted I am to be in Regina. It's the first time in over 20 years, and to see all your beautiful faces, it's just very meaningful. And I feel very honored. Thank you for the invitation, Alyssa. And what I notice about all of your work, and I'm going to ask you individually questions, I noticed that this is a kind of geographically informed wayfinding through the Black Renaissance of the prairies. That's what I refer to this moment as. So I feel very inspired and curious about your individual experience of prairie life. And so I'll begin with a question for you, Richard. I know you lived in Alberta. I'm curious, could you share a little bit more about how that cultural experience informs your practice today? The work in the show in particular.
Yeah. I'd like to say one thing. I was born in Edmonton, and then my father he worked in the oil industry, so he was a driller on oil rigs. So it was, we moved wherever the oil was. So I lived in a lot of places in Alberta. We jumped to about 10 or 11 elementary schools throughout the course of my life. Jumping in. I didn't think much about the prairies after I left. I was really happy to get out of here. Really. I moved to Toronto. I didn't think about this for a really, really long time. I was very selfish in my own, like trying to build my own career and things like that. And then being confronted by something like the passing of your parents, you like, and it's also being back here has been the kind of cold like that we had yesterday, where it's like numbing, and then the snow hits you with these like tiny knives, like, and the way that numbing, violent, tiny pain is like something we don't really get in Toronto. Like it's everything melts before it on your face, so it's like hits it or something, it doesn't stay solid. Anyway,
Don't get any luck with that.
yeah.
That's right.
But it was something that's very common to this area and to Alberta. But I also want to clear up one thing: is I grew up near Amber Valley. Pickersville's not that far away. But my family are Baldwins and Watsons and Jacksons, and we come from Louisiana, and they came up through the Underground Railroad and we settled in Ontario. And because there's lots of addiction and violence and abuse in my family particularly, which I was going to get too much into here, the family, my grandfather came from 21 kids, my mom's family came from 14, and half of the oldest and youngest split off and kind of came across the country to kind of get away from each other. So that's how I ended up here, was that a lot of the brothers and sisters came to Edmonton. After my parents left, after they passed away, and in the process of doing this sort of work, which I was kind of thrust into, I feel like almost involuntarily, the prairies experience was, thinking about my mother, brought me back here, and thinking about that, that image of her passing brought me back here, and then even being back here, they sort of run through all these scenarios about, the fights you would get into at school, like the lies you would tell to avoid certain types of fights, like straightening my hair at night with like a hairspray and like a sock, which is like the thing that my mom used to do to like avoid getting into fights over having black hair and things like curlier hair than other kids or whatever. Like, but all those kind of memories start to pop up and stuff like that. Like doing that work and doing this sort of research, finding out that there's this Black community like 100 miles away that we definitely did not learn about in what was called social studies when we were here. Also like the alternate narrative around Indigenous people that we were given that is very different than what I've come to know today. Thinking about all of that while making this work, going through all of these like archival work, working with the archive of my family's imagery to be able to pull out the volume that you see in that sculpture. Placed me back here in a big way, and I'm still kind of like processing it all. I feel that with every new wave of research that you engage with, or work that you're with, it like alters your worldview a little bit. The talk yesterday, you mentioned Rigby's, like my father's best friend was a Rigby. I remember Risby, sorry, yeah. And he had one of the Risby sons had a horrible bat problem in their house. I remember like pulling bats out of the attic for like we stayed at his house for they played football together. The Saskatchewan Red Prairies farm team. So it's wild. I'm still kind of processing the emotions just being here.
That makes definite sense, and I think you touched upon a question that I had out of the experience yesterday, where Leander, in the documentary that Cheryl directed, he refers to being angry that he didn't know this history, and it motivated him to do the work that he did. And I think that I was curious about the emotional response of that absence of history, and how your emotional life in particular. And maybe I'll go to the work that you were doing in the exhibit in terms of the wind rush. Talk to me a little bit about the emotional motivation that you had to delve more deeply into that migration.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And I'm going to title the first question also as somebody who came here as a student. And I think we can find few lines between these kind of quote unquote promises of a good life that we're talking about yesterday and today that a lot of that is not upheld. And and thinking about how these kind of record in different histories and people are doing this move here because of one move here, like if you think about it, we move here because go back, we're like, okay, because we are because of globalization and we're living in techno and various world, where it's like where it's uneven distribution of capital and people are looking at going into where where they can survive or thrive and whatnot. It is not right now. And sometimes people are always kind of reminded and within this all this classification of being human or whatnot, and I kind of saw myself as an immigrant in Winnipeg, some kind of undercurrent, which I could draw parallel to what is happening in multiple histories of moving and migration. But all this, just to bring it back a little bit to the classic, I think it's like the first mass migration of Africans, across the Atlantic, which became like the foundation of modernity or our present part of being. And think about the Windrush as I would say the first windfall migration across the Atlantic post-war, and using the word windfall because of also there was like a migration of like, people from the Americas to Liberia, in the 1820s and whatnot. And just about Windrush a little bit, it's like post-war, post-World War II, like the UK wanted to, a lot of people had died, and their labor market was so short and not everyone can fill positions, etc. And they're like, okay, people from the Commonwealth to come in and work. And the era was sort of named after this ship, Empire Windrush, that docked in Tilbury in 1984, but 1948. But like before 1948, the year before 1947, there was like two other like big ships that had like brought so many people from West Indies, to UK, and these people were faced with a lot of blowback, even though they're kind of keeping the economy afloat, and picking up jobs, etc. And we've heard stories decades after decades how people from that era, and it's like you can just wake up today as a British person today, and tomorrow you hear that you're British and if you leave the country, you might not come back. And I see this as like a recurring same thing is happening right now with the immigration in the States and Canada. And so in that sense, it's like kind of where kind of human beings are kind of used as a almost utility to and can be rejected, and apart from all those like other parts and movements and what they do, I'm also interested in the cultural implications of this movement. For example, within Winnipeg, I would say there's been a cultural in the sense of Black artists here and actually shaping what art is, in prose in general. I would say the same thing with the Windrush, it's like in music, that style, you had reggae, you had like clothing and fashion, and how like this movement shape art today, and not just culture in when it comes to style, but also culture when it comes to inventions and literature. And I kind of found myself really, really, really invested within the literature that came out of the Windrush, and also the time, just the time around, decades, the late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like music, and also what was happening in other places, what was happening in Africa, like the kind of bubblings of uh, uh, or the kind of the smell of independence and like, African scholars kind of going and schooling in England or UK and coming back, or what is happening in the US, whether it be jazz music, what's happening in literature, like the work of Claudia Jones and other people. So thinking about what is happening around the world and the kind of relationality then and how all those things kind of shape us today and how like um you know this our present category of the human still persists and has persisted and stems from that middle passage.
And that actually, all the things that you're saying actually brings me to your work, Iyunade, in terms of honoring your Nigerian cultural heritage and translating it to a Canadian context. Have you found with your photography and your film work, is there anything lost in translation or gained in translation? I'd like to learn a little bit.
So can you repeat the question?
Well, the question I have is in terms of honoring your cultural heritage, your African Nigerian heritage, and translating it in the Canadian prairie context. What nuances are lost in translation? Or are you having to adapt it? Are there things gained by having to translate a Nigerian cultural representation in this context today?
I try not to interpret too much. Most of my films are not in English. And I have a film that doesn't have subtitles. And, a lot of festivals have a problem with programming it. And I always just say there's no subtitles. You should watch the film that way and just read the synopsis. And I think that's enough. And like working, I feel like my practice is sort of like, it's like almost a merger of my Nigerian like visual like exposure and also like what I've seen in the prairies. I was early on I was sort of like exposed to a lot of video work that was made and specifically in Winnipeg. So I kind of have like an extensive idea of what people were making like 50 years ago, 40 years ago. And just yesterday I was talking about this black filmmaker from Winnipeg. I think his work is sort of like forgotten, just because
What's the artist's name?
I think his name is Winston Moxon. I think. Yeah, he made films in Winnipeg, and I think his work is sort of I don't know, doesn't exist in the collective consciousness of people that make moving images in Winnipeg. And I think learning about his work and his sort of like his existence in Winnipeg, because when I started making films, I met just maybe only two other black people that are making moving images in Winnipeg, which is very discouraging. I also came as a student too, so it was we were exposed to European art house and also like the Winnipeg film style, and so it was there wasn't really much exposure on what like maybe what black people were making in the prairies, or even African films. So I kind of just I think I was sort of inspired by what I saw at the University of Manitoba. There's like this group of friends, black artists. They're also international students. They also made art, and I go to some of their studios lots. So I kind of just go inspired by them to sort of just make work that doesn't like that I don't have to explain too much of what I'm doing. I just really stand by and believe in my ideas and what I'm inspired by. And yeah, they really had an influence on me and sort of the way I made art. So yeah.
Well, I really do see that in terms of, I'm also someone that has gravitated to moving image media, film, and photography, because if I could paint, I would do that, but I cannot, so I use a camera. And also the work travels when I cannot. There's a facility to share a message digitally in terms of moving image, and there is the infrastructure of festivals, and we need to kind of preserve this moving imagery and these templates of photography. So you'll see I'm looking at my phone. It's because I'm trying to keep up with the times. I would like to have paper, but my questions are on my phone. So I'm not playing Candy Crush.
I'm sorry, can you just say something about festivals? And I don't believe in like festivals as a way to sort of make to circulate work. Just because festivals are like they say they're for independent cinema, or they say they're for cutting-edge cinema, or whatever. That's really not the case, and they sort of want a specific type of work sometimes, and it's like and some of our works exist outside of that form. So.
I am 100% in agreement with these stories and this wayfinding. I think we need to recall these stories are our intellectual property, and they have been used, applied, distributed, circulated in ways that might be exploiting our cultural story. So retaining that ownership of these stories, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle of what is happening at the Dunlop here today. And everyone in this room is part of that. I'm very excited for what lies ahead. So hold on to that criticality. I think that will take us very far. And so now, actually, Alyssa, I do have a question in terms of producing this exhibition. Tell me a bit more about your vision. I feel you have a vision for what is possible. And how do you think unearthing the history will help activate actual today's stories from another generation?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me that started because so when I first moved out here, I left Toronto in 2018, so almost 7 years ago, and I first moved to Brandon, Manitoba, and I think I really had this desire to learn and understand more about this place that was pretty new to me. I had maybe only visited once before, and that was it. And I think I had this desire to understand more about that. And for me, that came through wanting to learn more about the histories of this place. And I think the idea of this desire to learn more about history also kind of runs in my family, actually. So I think it's very present, and I think the way that we figure out the world around us. So I really just dove into that, and that's how I stumbled upon the work of Beal, and I thought, well, why don't more people know about this? And I think I just wanted to bring that visibility to his practice, and At the time, I was one of the few Black curators working in a public art museum in the region. And I think learning about Beal's practice kind of made me realize that, there's other people who have been doing this before me. And so it gave me a bit more, I guess, confidence or sense of grounding in this place that I found myself in. And so I wanted to so really, I guess the idea kind of started from there in 2018, 2019. And I've just been thinking about it since then. Like, how can I foster these connections between work that contemporary Black Prairie artists are doing and work that was happening in the past. And I think I just started to get to know people over time after living out here. And I had done studio visits with a bunch of people, with Chukwudubem and Iyunade. I got to meet people like Kamalet and Shimbi, and I think that their work just because living in Toronto, you don't. Toronto has this ability to really, create this insularity to your way of working. But it was only when I left Toronto when I realized and I thought, there's so much that Black artists are doing outside of Toronto, and especially here in the prairies. And I just felt compelled to support that. So over time, that's sort of how the idea came.
Well, I think that's a wonderful segue to my curiosity about the people in this room. It seems like Regina is ready for this conversation in ways that I've lived all across this country, worked all across this country, and to see all of you here on a Saturday when it's so cold out to have this conversation, I'm very interested to learn more about why do you think this conversation is happening in this place at this time?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to open it up to some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we can come around. Or you can just project your voice.
I want to thank the moderator and the artist and creator for sharing a bit about your work and the process behind it and the questions and responses. Something that comes to my mind that I'd love to hear a bit more about from the artists, but also Dana and Melissa, would be I'm kind of noticing how the three of you, when you speak about the work that you have in the show, it kind of taps into almost like, if not a matrilineal thing, some engagement with Black women, Black womanhood in relationship to readings or the context that you have mentioned, if thinking through Black feminism, either explicitly or implicitly, is also a part of your process. And yeah, just like what are your thoughts around that, around kind of trying to honor or depict this experience that's separate from your gender identity would kind of be interesting to hear about. And then for the curator and moderator, I'm curious if you had any thoughts around that framework or any thoughts that you might have noticed.
I can.
Please do, Alyssa, jump right in terms of response.
Sure. Yes. So I was definitely thinking about Black feminism and the experience of Black women living here, like in the prairies. And so when people go into the exhibition, some of the photos from the Frank B. Jamerson font, I chose to enlarge them, make them just really big, for a couple of reasons. Partially because I wanted people to really appreciate the details in people's expressions and the photos, but also to, just highlight the importance of certain people, and really, especially highlight some of the matriarchs in the communities, in the Amber Valley community. And so there's one of the photos, which I think a lot about. It's a photo of Mary Fair, which is also the photo that was in Deliso's thesis. And essentially, it's a photo of Mary Fair just lounging. She's kind of relaxing on like a hilltop. And it made me really think about this idea of, and Dane and I were talking about this dichotomy between work and leisure. And I think especially about that in terms of how it pertains to Black women. And so I had read this book by Dion Brand about labor and work in Canada in the 1940s. And she,
for those of you who don't know, Dion Brand is a celebrated African Canadian poet based in Toronto.
And she is primarily a poet, and she had also just written this book that takes a look at like early work experiences of Black women in Canada. And in it, some of the questions she asked a bunch of questions, and one of those questions is, where did you socialize? And so when I see that photo of Mary Fair, it makes me think about, what was her work experience like, and also where did she socialize? Because I think that this idea of like finding leisure is really compelling to me. And that was also sort of politicized. It is sort of politicized too, because when the photo was taken in around 1940, just a few years later, like we all know about Viola Desmond now because she's on our $10 bill, but it was, I think only in 1946 where Viola Desmond was arrested from a movie theater with presumably also just to have a moment of leisure to watch the movies. And so I just think about the politics of Black women seeking out leisure in the prairies, and a lot of that is present for me in that image, and was something I was thinking about as I was doing research.
I want to just say, I was talking about, I want to be very brief for this, but because I know you have other things to say, but like you said, the people like who influence my practice, especially in the contemporary right now, are mostly a Black women and mostly a Black women from Caribbean, and poets, I think one to one. And how they kind of stick to methodology. I'm thinking about it with even to the Middle Passage, now with the American, under the spirit, sound, which are the Black herons, kind of still brings this reference. So it's like methodology is really grounded in this kind of like work of Black women. And but also within our work, guys, in the show too, I think there is also that there I'm still thinking about women with motherhood and other things too, and also just the like I'm thinking about errantry. I'm also thinking about the mundane and just kind of just being, and I have images of just this these sisters just being in the park and sitting and talking, so or or just moments of as and being in the workforce. So I think it's kind of stuff just kind of thoughts that are I would say educated in practice directly and indirectly. Yeah.
I want to Thank you for that. And I am interested in your responses specifically, but in terms of leisure, just this morning, for example, I don't know if the young man that I walked into the library with is here at this moment, but a young black man, and he had his hood up and his toque on, and he was stopped at the door, and he was told, and he had to reveal himself before he was permitted to enter.
That happened to me too. And then the white people who came after, they didn't accidentally pick up.
Yeah.
I was
So
like,
I asked him, does that
brother.
happen a lot? He's like, yeah. So in terms of the violence of that, I had the fights to go compare notes, and growing up in Ontario, it was part of the experience. It's and I'm interested to learn your perspectives on how to honor that history and the question about Afrofeminism and even Afrofuturism that I kind of get a sense for both of your practices and imagining a future.
I think it's an interesting question. I wanted to stay true to the masquerading tradition itself, and masquerading tradition only honors matrilineal ancestors. And from my research, it's an elaborate society, the society performance, and then we were mostly made up of men, and then we have the higher society that's made up of women and different others. You have the women that are meant for protection, and the women that are in control of running the society. And it was very interesting to me because I grew up with my grandmother. She used to tell me about things like that, and I wasn't paying much attention to the smaller history until I started to study the much bigger history about about what the where we were from, and what kind of beliefs and sort of what we had. And it was interesting to study, and also ask a lot of questions from my aunt. And when I was making the project, my grandmother was very sick, so she couldn't remember a lot. So, and she, was a custodian for the family, and, because, like I said in my introduction, my family sort of were displaced and had to move to a new place and sort of start life all over again. And so the history they have is the history of the masquerade itself, and the history of sort of starting a new life in somewhere else. And obviously she was sort of everyone's mother, and yeah, she sort of basically was the matriarch of the family. She knew basically most of the traditions and stuff. But I never really had much exposure to it, yeah, because my family ended up converting to Christianity. Some parts converted to Islam, and only a sect sort of just kept the traditional religion, and they're the ones that sort of have more authority. The masquerading tradition today. So.
Can you state, please? Okay. It's for me maybe I want to be pretty careful about how I answer this question. The way that I would really answer is that I wouldn't be here, my practice wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Black women. Obviously, my mother. I want to give a shout out to Nehal Al-Bibi for making all of this possible, for linking me with yourself, and for being part of the show. I think all the most compelling work right now is all written by Black women, whether it's Kathleen Youssef and right in the middle of A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, which is a phenomenal book. If people haven't read it, please read it. More to Vivian.
Title again?
A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, by really it's Kathleen Youssef, which is a seminal reading. Another one is More to Vivian by Kimberly Juanita Brown from MIT Press. I think some of the two most powerful books I'm reading right now are any of the cosigns I've had to be where I am, are all Black and brown women. Like I don't like what it's all the work coming out of the Ottawa group, War Mother, Black Woman Futurists, the Super Futures Haunt Collective, like all of that work for me is highly influential and drives a lot of some of the further research that I do. Yeah, did you ask about Afrofuturism?
I inquired about that. That's my personal creative relationship to our diasporic experience of constant ocean.
Yeah.
Imagine.
And also reimaginings of time, which is phenomenal too. So like, going back to like Samra Orchestra, or like one of my favorites, I think if anybody who ever asked me my favorite artist is, it's always Ramelzy forever. His work in Gothic Futurism is phenomenal. The way he like re-symbolized everything around him to be something like a new cosmological narrative was phenomenal. And coming from somebody who had nothing, and kind of still thought I'm phenomenal with my finances. I don't really have much now. Like that ethos and the way of working and being resourceful and resistant is like is everything to me. So like Afrofuturism is one flavor of a whole rich array of chronopolitical cultural narrative arcs to be pulling from. There's fantastic sick futurists. There's Gulf Futurism. There's a
That's a new one to me.
Gulf Futurism is phenomenal work coming out of the Middle East. Rajni Pereira's work, she's Sri Lankan, and just phenomenal. I think there's an interesting red thread that's happening, and because Canada is this massive mix of diasporic cultural entry, there's a negotiate. I don't even know if it's a negotiation, whether it's in the curatorial practices or in individual practices of artists, that there's like a wave of interesting like a new architecture of solidarity that's occurring across these cultural arcs, and new Afrofuturist work is some of that's coming out of Canada. But I wouldn't even say I'm like in it or at the forefront or adjacent. I don't really know. I'm just kind of stumbling around. Yeah.
And in terms of time, I just want to make sure, are there any other questions from this marvelous audience?
I think we have time for maybe one more question, then we do have to wrap it up for the day. No other questions? Okay.
I just want to say a couple things because since I'm not very much I talk. First, honestly, like my present practice right now, like the way it is right now, is really I'm really taking from Sylvia Winter's work as a whole. In particular, her very lengthy essay on certain community of thing. But I also want to please talk about production within the prairies and in connection to history. I was in Winnipeg for like almost a decade before just moving to grad school. But I feel like everybody within Winnipeg had it's like we were like especially it was a mixture of people. We had people from Caribbean, people from Africans. A lot of us who came as students and didn't have family, so kind of had to create our own family. And we're doing particular things. For example, I kind of had a library, which was like a large library that was not used by community, and that library was also like I don't say funded or like funded by community in a way because they're buying these books, and these were kind of like an alternative to like what we're teaching now. So it's like a kind of this business new kind of sense of knowledge, and you not have like a whole like a film like a library of film, but with links and whatnot. So it's kind of this work we're doing. And I kind of realized what we're doing, I'm trying to connect this to something. What we're doing, we're kind of creating this new language, a new, a kind of realization that I am kind of creating this, that I kind of find it similar to what's going on in the Caribbean, literally what's going on, very, very Creole, very, a kind of new mode of being that's kind of like of thinking that's kind of like taken from different places and also coming out of displacement. And I kind of want to talk about it in connection to history, and my kind of looking to history surpasses the idea what it is because of the idea of being grounded or being of rootedness, kind of knowing things. So but I think it surpasses that. I think we're looking at history to kind of look at patterns and other things in order to navigate the future. Kind of like to respond to Amy Caesar's call of kind of an elaboration of a new science to be able to confront the catastrophes within a day. So like I kind of see one thing that's also really great within this when I look at historical works, for example, that tying this back to the English, when I look at the work of like let's say Iyunade, who kind of like castle on the skin. I'm thinking about like I'm trying to get things and methods kind of from thinking that kind of really applies to today. Or when I look at people who, for example, let's say Stuart Hall or Derek Walker's kind of point of view, or people who are also thinking about the Atlantic too, like Glissan. It's like we're kind of looking for methodologies that applicable not just to kind of know and to be very versed in history, but also to confront the future.
Well, I
Okay.
think that is
Yes.
exactly it. We're creating something new, and I want to thank Alyssa and everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. So yeah, I'm really sorry. The reason why I was just trying to wrap things up is because we now have another event happening in the library today. So if you want to join us upstairs, we have our Black History Month celebration event. Dunlop Art Gallery, we've partnered with the Community Engagement Department to have, there's going to be performances, drumming, food, etc. So if you want to gradually make your way upstairs to the mezzanine level, then that's going to be happening shortly. So thank you so much for joining us here, and see you upstairs soon.